Hey,
Hey
Jeff.
everybody, I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works, and that is Justin, our mentor from JA Digitizing Studios. And today we will be talking about creating custom fonts. And this is something that Justin loves to do.
Love it.
Pretty much, we in our Discord channel. If you're not members of our Discord, you should definitely go join. We have a suggest a live topic, and we actually had the live topic suggested that we go over fonts. Let me go pull that up in my Discord. I'm not going to pull it up on screen, but let me find where that is while Justin talks.
So, Jeff and I were actually debating the term font, what it truly means. A font, when you go to your computer and you're using a word processing program, an art program, whatever, typically there's stock fonts that are installed on your particular computer. And there's thousands and thousands of fonts out there. When it comes to embroidery, we have embroidery software such as Wilcom, Pulse, Floriani, something like that. They're going to come with their own set of stock fonts, and they're pre-digitized fonts, and they're created in a way that we're going to show you how to create a font within a certain software. We're going to be using Wilcom today.
Later.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, the way I create and sell fonts, and this is mainly so everybody that no matter what software they can use or they do use, they can use the font. I don't know if font is the best term to call it. I guess it's more of an alphabet of a style of a font. Because the way I do it is I digitize individual letters. I'll pick a size that I'm shooting for. Most of my fonts are kind of like hat-oriented fonts that I do. A lot of them are 3D puff. But I digitize individual letter, save it as its own file, and then the end user can put those letters together to form whatever word, sentence, whatever it is that they want to do. So mine is more an alphabet type of way. So it's just saved, like I said, in generic files, DST, PES, whatever files that you use. The alternative is creating an actual font that you can keyboard into your embroidery software. Every embroidery software that has the capability of creating a font is going to have its own file type that corresponds with how it works with the software. I believe it's an ESA font that works with Wilcom.
Yep.
Pulse, Floriani, everything else is going to have its own, native file type when it comes to a font. So those are the two main ways of creating a quote-unquote font for embroidery. So it's choosing the font that you're looking for as far as the style of the letters and the actual font that you're choosing, and you're bringing it into the embroidery world and creating a either usable font in any particular software or an alphabet. So each of those letters are digitized. So those are the two approaches that we're going to talk about.
Yep. So one of the key things to note here is that depending on your software, you may have the ability to map an alphabet, like Justin was talking about digitizing. You may have the ability to map that to a keyboard, which makes it almost like an ESA font or an object-oriented font, because now you can type it out with your keyboard. You're going to run into limitations with sizing. You're not really going to be able to change a lot with density or underlays unless if your software is breaking it up into objects, which then you get mixed results. But a native font is built up of native objects that are assigned stitch types that they'll scale. You can edit, but those come at a significant cost.
Right. And not only that, if you're looking to use your software that has that capability, whether it's a built-in element that comes with your software, in its package, or it's an add-on element like it is in Wilcom, it's also the ability to learn how to properly do it. And that way, when all those letters are typed out, they're going to interact with each other properly. so at proper heights and sizes and whatnot, and so you're not fighting with them after digitizing the whole font and trying to bring it into the system like that.
Yep.
So,
and maybe I guess we should cover the difference between a true type font, because I cannot tell you how many times I see people go, "Oh, you just download a font from DuffFont and then you type it out."
right.
So
That's that. Another whole other throw a wrench in the thing. Some software like Wilcom will allow you to import a font as long as it's a true type font. So if my particular computer has Arial or Times Roman or whatever it may be, I'm just naming some real generic fonts there. It does its best to take that font from your system, turn it into stitches. So it is
auto digitizing.
Auto digitizing. If you're good at editing within your system, I think this is kind of a quick cheat. If you know you have a font in on your computer and you don't want to digitize something out, you can auto digitize using this function and make some quick edits. But 9 times out of 10, there is some editing because there's going to be a letter that's done funky, or stitch directions are kind of weird, or how it paths a letter is not pleasing to the eye. So you're going to want to edit it.
Yep. You also need to realize that it will auto digitize the lettering every time you type it. It's not going to remember the settings or the changes that you did the last time. It will auto digitize it every time you type it.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, you'll type out that word with that particular font, and however it is, the size, the settings that you apply to it, it's going to digitize it in that way, and you're going to have to edit that particular file.
All right. Are there any other disclaimers we should throw in here before we get going? Fonts are a really touchy subject. I won't say touchy subject, but it's something that everybody knows how it should look.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they don't do embroidery, they know how it should look.
Yeah. It's a very complex subject, I'll tell you that much. I mean,
yep.
Just lettering and embroidery, period, like you said, it's the first thing that catches your eye when someone reads a design. So it's highly scrutinized. Mistakes or blemishes or things that may not look quite right stand out like sore thumb because you are reading it. So yeah, it is difficult sometimes just in straight out digitizing lettering in a design. But this is where you're trying to create a full set of letters for an alphabet and making sure that every single letter is done properly and goes well with each other.
All right. Let's jump into it. You'll go first. You got your screen up.
Yeah. There was one thing, actually, it was a subject that came up with a customer that was discussing a quote on digitizing a font for them. And it was actually a 3D puff font that they're wanting. It's a script type font. It's not this font. It's a script font that they sent me a picture, and they were looking to do. Obviously, they were trying to do a series of different words on a full chest of sweatshirts, and they wanted to do it 3D puff. They actually grabbed a sample of shirts that have been floating around the socials that I actually saw myself. Looks pretty cool as far as like the names of towns and whatnot. But the drawback with 3D puff fonts, which if you look at any of my 3D puff fonts, like I said, I digitize the individual letters. So the individual letters are going to sew the way they're supposed to sew, with the proper bridges, with the proper end caps. And they work individually. Now, if you bring in letters and put them side by side, they're still going to work individually and they're going to sew properly. A script font is a little bit different when it comes to 3D puff. I would lean towards digitizing the exact words the way they are. This particular person was asking for a full alphabet because they were wanting to do a series of different words. So it'd be, quite costly trying to digitize that many files for them. But the thing that came to my attention is, if you see in here underneath all the top stitches, you're going to have support stitches. You're going to have bridges where parts of the the 3D puff itself is split together and come together. And anytime you have an end cap of a satin or an open end of a satin, you're always going to have end caps. So the issue that I'm having is anytime the lowercase letters are going to be overlapping, if you look at these letters individually, they're going to have the proper end caps to make sure that that foam is cut when it's sewn. But there's no way of eliminating that when the satin stitches are going to be overlapping when the satin letters come together. And it's typically the style of a script font is it's like handwriting where it sews without picking the pen up per se. Like if you were writing out block letters, there's going to be pen up, pen down between each letter. In a script font, it's fluid. So these areas that are crossing over each other, that you're going to have the end caps crossing over the other letter, is the concern that I have. If you know digitizing for 3D puff, there is almost triple the amount of density used in a 3D puff design than a regular satin in order to cut the foam. So when you have the layer of foam, when you have the layer of the regular satin stitch that's for that letter, and then on top of it, you're throwing something else that's overlapping it. I would hate to do this font for this person, say everything's going to work fine, and then when they start overlapping them, you're going to get thread breaks, possible needle breaks, just because you're having so many stitches on top of the foam, on top of the fabric, on top of each other. So that's one thing you need to think about when you're picking a font and its application, to make sure that there's not going to be any weird quirks in it before digitizing a whole font out. So I hope that's kind of a clear explanation for this individual. I told her to watch tonight so she could kind of understand what I was a visual and what I was trying to explain. But that's one drawback of a 3D puff font, when you are kind of piecing together those letters together. So the biggest thing is really keep in mind the application, the size of the font, everything about how you're trying to use it before kind of jumping in and either digitizing the individual letters in an alphabet or applying it to a keyboard font for your particular software. I guess we got some technical difficulties on Jeff's side.
You totally froze and everything disappeared for a minute.
Oh. Just going back to referring to the element of font creation in Wilcom, that's an element that I actually don't have. I've never really got into creating ESA fonts, so I've never got into that as much as Jeff does, but he does have the capability and the know-how on his software. So I'm hoping he's got his software up. Do you have it up and running?
In theory.
In theory?
We will find out very, very shortly. This was one of those great things, everybody, that right before the live, it was deemed that we needed to instantly reboot my computer because my software wouldn't open. But it does seem to be up and sort of functioning at the moment. So I just scanning through. We've got a lot of people joining us. Thanks for coming out. And we actually had one question come in, and it was from Regina King. Would you recommend 3D on a single needle?
What do you think, Jeff?
Justin made a face. So I think I know where Justin sits because he made a face. I can honestly tell you it really depends on the single needle. And the reason why I say that is, if you guys don't know who Alexis Galloway is, she's a brother educator. She does So Sweet Academy. She's done classes where she's done 3D puff on a single needle machine. Typically, I want to say she uses All Brothers. And she was able to do that on her machine. Right. I have a Genome MemoryCraft M400E. That was my very, very first machine back in the ancient times when I started. And my presser foot ride height is not high enough to accommodate foam. So I literally, the foam won't pass under the presser foot. So I can't do it, especially when you add the thickness of the project that's in there. Now, if you have a brother in Bernina, I think, maybe Bernina. If you have the tubular arm model of a single needle, because they do have those single needles that have a tubular arm. Those ones I've seen people do 3D puff on as well. As far as recommending it, your machine can punch through it, especially if you get some of the like the Madeira bodybuilder, like an old foam. Your machine will punch through it. It's just whether or not you have the right height clearance.
Right.
So this is going to be a test and or find out if somebody that has your type of machine already has that capability.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. There's like Jeff was saying, there's a lot of variance when it comes to single needle machines. Pretty much, if you say, hey, digitize this for an industrial embroidery machine, 9 times out of 10 you're not going to have an issue. But yeah, the pressure foot height is one thing. Best bet is to, if you can note that the height is high enough for your pressure foot, always maybe grab a sample letter, sample file, kind of test it out before you start getting into digitizing full fonts and going head first into it. Definitely something you want to check out first.
Yep. And yeah, I know with my machines, 8mm is, you're pretty much hitting the max. And that's not because you can't do more. It's literally because the presser foot cannot go up any higher. So if you start putting like 12, 14mm, I've seen people do it because the ride height is roughly 15 to 16mm. So you can put 15 to 16mm material on there, but it's going to smash it down to 8mm no matter how much you build up there. It's right. Because your presser foot is hitting the bottom of your thread guide on your needle bar block, and that's driving it down. So there are limitations to even commercial machines, although they are a lot higher than home machines.
Right. And typically when I'm digitizing for 3D puff, I always recommend 3 to 4mm. You get the right foam, the right density of the foam, and that's going to be, more than enough to get that really crisp 3D look.
All right. Well, now that we've covered all of the maybe prerequisites, I don't know. We'll call them different things. I'm going to basically show you guys how I set up when I start doing a font. We will just be doing a random true type font. We'll be dumping in here. And I'll talk about some of the things that I set up, the reason why I set them up that way. And we'll go through actually, we'll digitize just a couple of letters because it'll take fonts take a hot minute to digitize. So we'll digitize a couple of letters and then we'll go through the saving out process and what the steps are and what it means. Let's just jump right into it. So I'll go ahead and go in here. Now, if I want to be able to do a font, I'm going to start with HIJKLMNOPQRSTUV WXYNZ. So first off, I'm going to create the text. We're going to dump it in here, and I'm going to go all the way down until we get into some of my true type fonts way down here. Oh, now we're really into some of the fonts. I have a lot of fun fonts. So we'll just go with Railway Black. And is it going to do it? I think it changed it. So we're going to dump it back down into vector mode because this is essentially what we're going to be digitizing. Now you can see that for the most part, it did okay. It did overlap some of these letters, which is going to be problematic, honestly. So we're going to see if we can space them out a little bit. It did do them all as one vector. So we'll go ahead and break it apart. And it did that. So we'll undo that. We'll undo that. And we'll add some spaces in here. Now you can do this if you're just running with straight art. Still going. Yeah. Y and Z. There we go. So you can do this if you're just going off of a reference art. You can do it if you're doing a A true type font, you can do it based off of anything. Right now, the height of this object is in here, and it's at 10.23 millimeters. I'm going to jump that up to 25 millimeters. I like to do it at 25 millimeters. No particular reason. I do think that it helps in the process, especially when doing it in Wilcom. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type out, it was railroad black. You tell me if I'm wrong. I think that's what it was.
I think so. And
then underneath that, I'm going to put 25 millimeters. And we'll go ahead and hit create text. And I'm going to place that up here. And it doesn't matter what font I drop that in. It just matters that it's there. And the reason is a lot of times when you're digitizing a font, you might name it something shorter in your software to make it easier for you to type in the file names. Maybe you're taking out spaces, that kind of stuff. So it always helps to have your the name of the font that you're basing this off of, or the name of the design that you're basing it off of. So when you do have to come back to this file and you save it out, you know what you started with. So this is basically just a reference. And then the 25 millimeters is my reference height. So in embroidery fonts and in fonts, there's something called an EM value. The EM value is your height. It's based off of, as far as I can tell, it's hearsay. But it's basically the reference height of your M character. And it's taking and setting your kerning, or the space between your letters, based off of the EM value. Okay. So right now our EM value, our M character is going to be, it's 24.99, it's 25 millimeters. Okay. Now I put these all out in a single line. This is important for if you're bringing in and doing individual artwork, because if you're doing individual artwork, you need to have a common baseline. In this software, you digitize the baseline as you save out every letter. So having a common baseline between them makes it a lot easier. And honestly, I'm going to select the entire thing and I'm going to pull it down and I'm going to drop it right on this guideline, because now I can use that guideline as my baseline, and I'm actually going to drop in another guideline on top of it, because that's going to make it a little bit easier for me to be able to see. Now, these are the steps. I'm going to preface this with, these are the steps that I take when I do it in Wilcom. Okay. When I do it in other softwares, they all handle baselines a little bit differently. And your baseline is when you draw your line and you type out your text, that bottom line that you draw is your baseline. Okay. And so it's important that you're handling the baselines in a consistent manner, so that when you do type out your text, it's all going to be referenced properly. Okay. Now, if I was going to do lowercase, I've done it two different ways. I'll either stick it out here way on the end, so it'll just go uppercase, lowercase, and then numbers. I've also stacked them vertically, and I will talk about, and we'll actually just go ahead and type in some of the lowercase. I'm singing the song in my head. Matt did it to me.
Fun fact. Did you know the alphabet song is the same tune for Twinkle Twinkle Little Star? Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, there you go. And then we're going to go railroad. And it is a true type font, so we're going to have to jump down. Or it's railway black. So let's go ahead and change that to railway. And see, now if I opened up my software in a month, I'd have been so lost. We're going to go in here and we're going to do our height. We'll go ahead and do that at 25 millimeters. And you'll notice, because I did these in two separate objects, now both of my fonts are at 25 millimeters. Ultimately, it's the K that I'm looking at, and it's basing it off of the baseline height. So if we come in here, this is the height based off of the baseline. So when it has a descender that goes below the baseline, it's not accounting for that in the actual height of the letter. It's basing it off of the letters like K or H or F. So This is also important to know because I'm going to convert it to an object, right? To a vector object now, like I would if I was bringing in art. And as you can see with this entire object right up here, it says it's 35 millimeters tall. And that's going from the highest point down past the baseline to the lowest point. So when you're setting these up, you need to be cognizant of, am I doing it based off of the baseline height, or am I doing it off of the overall height? If I was doing these both off of the overall height, it would make it very, very difficult for me to match up these letters because I don't know how tall the E is supposed to be, or the L, because I do have these descenders. So then I have to measure. It becomes a whole thing. So sometimes if you're doing it based off of art, it's good to have it all in one image file. And you can do this based off of like a PNG. We'll call it a PNG. You can do it based off of any image. Okay. So the next part is, well, fairly simple. I think we're going to end early today, Justin, unless you have questions. We'll see how many questions you have. So the next part is pretty much simple. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to lock everything because I don't want to touch it, bump it, move it, all those fun things. Bop it. No. Got him. All right. At least I got him with that one. All right. So we're pretty much just going to digitize our letters. When I do fonts, depending on the software, I don't like to put runs in. I'll just kind of digitize the objects and I'll try to make them flow together as best they can. I did forget, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to remove all of my pull compensation and I'm going to remove all of my underlay because I don't really need those. Make properties current. Pretty much what I'm getting out of this is I'm getting the object lines. So I'm tracing to vector and I'm getting my stitch angle lines. So this is going to be for to assign the stitches to when it generates it later. Words, Justin, words.
Yeah. So yeah, he's going against true digitizing theory as far as push and pull compensation, because once this becomes a font and you set the settings of underlays and compensation and whatnot, that will universally add that to whatever text that you're typing out. Now, what about push? Because there's not a push compensation setting in Wilcom to use. Will you?
So here's the fun fact about this, Justin, because you'll like this, because why not? Your push compensation on a 2-inch letter is different than on a 1/2-inch letter.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. So I don't digitize with push compensation in mind. Mostly because when you come into your letters here with like your B and it curves across the top, this object ends at the exact same height as this baseline right here. And with no pull compensation added, when I add the 0.2 pull compensation, it's going to throw these stitches 0.2 higher than this. So you're getting kind of a rough push compensation based off of your pull compensation.
Yeah. So anything perpendicular to an open end, you're going to add that pull comp, which is going to expand those letters, so it won't expand out from the edges. So you will get that difference.
You'll get some. It's not going to say that you're not going to have to go in there and edit it a little bit.
And honestly, that goes for all fonts, depending on like Jeff just stated, depending on the size of the font that you're doing or the letters that you're doing. The push is going to be more evident in a certain size font next to the next, even in a different font. So they digitize them, trying to do the most average size use in their push and pull, or I'd say just push on this concern. But there is sometimes that you have to adjust that depending on the look of it. So when you do get those PDF files like I send to my customers with the end designs, and you see the lettering that's all over the place, different heights, and it looks like it's all over the place. It's supposed to look like that. What you're seeing is all the push and pull compensation that I am adding to the file. So when it sews, all those things are going to come together and hopefully have a nice even baseline, and all the letters are going to be even. So, but in digitizing the font, like Jeff's saying, he is truly just tracing the shape of each letter, and he's not worried about any of those compensations because that's going to be added in the settings once you use this font within the software.
I'm glad that you picked all that up. At least somebody did. So I'm going to go into a little bit why I removed the pull compensation on this, because that is something that when I initially did my first font, I was like, I don't know why I have to turn that off. I'm just going to leave it on. Well, when you save the pull compensation onto the letter, that now, when it types out the letter, it treats that as 0. So then when you go and add more pull compensation, you're compounding your pull compensation.
Right.
So that's why I set that to 0. The underlay I took out of there, mostly because I don't want to see it. I'm just looking at the straight object lines. I'm looking at the stitches and making sure they're flowing properly. Now, you'll notice that I didn't path these letters. There's 2 ways to actually save out a letter in Wilcom. Okay. And I believe that you can actually utilize it when you're typing it out. I don't know that on hand, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but I could be. When you save it, you can save it as digitized, or I want to say its closest point. We'll get to that later when we open it up. If I save it as digitized, that's more for like script fonts. It's more concerning your baseline, but it's going to branch your letter. So it's automatically going to try and path everything. It's going to branch it all. So I don't necessarily need to go in and change it for like a straight block font. Now, if I'm doing a script font where I want it to run exactly as digitized, especially with the baselines, then I'm going to have to add in some of that pathing, or I'm going to have to make sure that my start and stop points do cover. Because I'm pretty sure, I'm like 90% sure, that you can, when you're sewing it out, you can sew it out as branched, or you can sew it out as digitized. And if you sew it out as digitized, and I left it like the A is right now, where I have a trim here and a trim here and a trim here, it'll actually sew that out and it'll throw trims in there. And we don't necessarily want that. So I will go in and I do set my start and my stop points, so that if somebody does change this as like an as digitized and they go to sew it out, at least it's not going to trim in the letter, right? It's, if I digitized this bar and then this bar and then this crossbar right here, and they did it as digitized, it would sew it in that order.
Right.
If I sew it as regular, it's going to start probably right here, and it'll basically just branch the letter. It'll start it on the left, end it on the right.
Yeah, you're going to have a bunch of trims within the elements, the different elements that make up that letter.
Yeah, I hope that made a lot of sense. Yeah. If it didn't make a lot of sense, then somebody in the comments say something. Otherwise, this is pretty much, we're into the digitizing portion of the font. Fonts need to be digitized like you would expect a letter to be digitized. I have a lot of people that sometimes, they'll say, hey, I don't know how to digitize this letter. I don't know how to handle this intersection. How do I want to do this? Right. And there are a couple of quick ways that you can go, if you're not quite sure how to handle a junction, you're not quite sure how to handle a sewing order or something like that, you can actually, you can go in here and let's just type out the letter A, and we're going to do it in the block 2, and I'll bump that up to 25 millimeters high, right? And we can come over here and you can actually look at how they handled it, right? So you can see that they handled the crossbar. They actually dropped it down below a little bit. On the inside, they overlapped it a little bit here. It overlapped it a little bit there. If we went with like a Z, which is a letter that people tend to ask, you can see that they went all the way down, back, then they went down, and then they went all the way back again. Let's look at a Q. I'm trying to think of the letters that most people would go, I don't know how to handle this.
Gotcha.
But you can look at the letter and how they digitized it, and you can go, okay, well, I kind of know how I need to construct my letter, because
Right.
these digitized fonts, these object-based fonts that are in Wilcom or in Pulse or in Floriani or in Brilliance, which is the BX, those were all manually digitized by someone, right? So it's usually somebody that has a lot of experience. They know how to handle this, and they know what they're doing. So you can actually look at it and you can say, okay, this is how I'm going to handle this. I'm going to do it the same way that they did, right? So let's just look at, I'm going to look at my baseline settings.
And I'm sure you can find a font within your stock fonts of your software that's similar to the font that you're digitizing, to just like going through someone's digitized file, looking how it sews, what decisions are made. Same with this. Grab some letters that you're concerned about or you don't know how to handle, type them out, see how they're done, and you can apply it to the font that you're digitizing.
Yeah. And so you can see I broke these letters apart, and we're just going to focus on this A here. And I'm going to break it apart again, right? Now I have the individual blocks in the order that they digitized them. You can see that we have our start and our stops. We actually have some trims in there. So they may not have branched it. They may have, but it's something that I'm going to have to go in there and do. These are ways that you can look at an existing font. You can go, okay, well, I'm not sure how to handle my letter. How did this person handle their letter? And you can see it in DST fonts, like exported machine files. If you're doing like the slow redraw, you can see how those were handled. But the advantage of this is you can actually look at the objects and you go, okay, this is how they handled with the objects themselves. It's just a little bit easier to see that.
Right.
Okay. So let's go ahead and we're going to unlock the lower A, and I'm going to bring it up here a little bit higher. And I'm doing this more so that you guys can see what's going to happen here. And I'm going to lock it again. So next thing that we're going to do here is we've got 3 letters. We're going to save them into a font. Now, I talked about the baseline, right? We need to digitize based off of the baseline that we have. When we go to actually save this as a font, we're going to be given an option here where we need to set our start point of our baseline and our end point of our baseline. So basically left side to the right side, because we read text left to right. The problem that we can run into is on letters like the C, the F, and some of the other letters is when I'm down here digitizing, if I get in here to really digitize this baseline, and I'm right there, and I click there, right? Now I got to kind of zoom out and come back across, and I got to pick, if the F, I'm not really going to see where that baseline is. So I bring in more guidelines, and I'll actually set them on the ends of the letters. Now, earlier when we talked about whether or not you would want to put these all in one line versus putting the top alphabet and then the bottom alphabet, is you can see now I have guidelines that are running through the middle of my lowercase alphabet, which makes it so now I have to readjust all my baseline, or not my baseline, my guidelines when I go to save out the lowercase. Where if I do it all in one really, really long line, I can set all my guidelines and just do it in one direction. The advantage of doing it this way is it's a little bit easier. It doesn't take up as much screen real estate or file real estate, so it's easier to see the letters. So this is really kind of a personal preference thing that you guys can do, that you can set up, and you can go, okay, this is how I'm going to handle, I'll move the baselines, the guidelines. I won't use the guidelines. This is all kind of personal preference. This is the way that I do it, right? So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the objects that make up that letter, okay? You can see I've got, this is 4 objects, right? And I made sure that I locked my art because I don't want to accidentally select my art and try to save it as part of the letter. That would not necessarily be good, okay? Found my mouse. All right. So now I'm going to hide my art because I don't necessarily want to see it. And I'm going to go up to Object and Create Letter. Now it's going to pop up and it's going to give me a couple of things to set here, okay? I can save this into any one of my fonts. They're all down listed there. I'm just going to create a new font. I'm going to call it Needle Bar Live, okay? The Default letter spacing. Okay. That is a percentage based off of the height. Typically, that's based off of the M in a font. That's why they call it the EM value. I'm not quite sure how Wilcom does it. I know other fonts will actually base it off of the letter height of the M. They'll call it a reference letter, and you have to digitize your reference letter first, or else it won't show in the font. Default letter spacing is going to be pretty much 10% of the letter height. That I want to say that that's what they all default with. I'd have to double check, but I'm not going to go into that right now. The next is the default join type, right? So this is where I went into the kind of the as digitized. If I wanted all of my letters to end right here where this triangle is and start right here, it would be as digitized. Those are advantageous when you're doing a script letter where you don't want a letter spacing and you want to make sure, like a script letter, you would have a 0% of your height because you want your baselines all touching. Mm-hmm. And then your default join type would be as digitized because you want to make sure that your tail, where your tail ends, it starts in the next letter. Justin's nodding his head, so that tells me he gets it.
Now you got to remember, this is going to be the default setting, and because you're creating an actual keyboard font for Wilcom, these are kerning and settings and pull comp and underlay. All that can be applied when you're actually using the font when it's all done.
So the default letter spacing is the kerning.
Right. I'm just saying when you're using the font, this is something that can be adjusted later if you're, say, like you're doing a logo where the letters have big gaps between them, you know, span. Yep. A lot of times you'll see a town name or something spanning the bottom of a logo instead of it being regular kerning. It's double or triple spacing. You can adjust that all when you're actually using the font. This is the default. When you grab the font, type it out. This is the default settings that's going to type in.
Yep. So our default join type, we have as digitized, closest join, or bottom join. I'm going to go, it's a straight block font. I'm going to go with closest point because I just pointed at my screen. You guys can't see when I point at my screen. With the B, the closest join is going to end up being right about right here. It's going to jump between the B and the C. So I generally go with the closest join. I could do with the bottom join, so it would actually probably end right here and jump over. I typically do closest join when it comes to block fonts, but just be aware that that is a setting. So this is creating the alphabet. This is going to be persistent across all of the letters that I save into this alphabet. Go ahead and hit OK. Now we have our needle bar live. This is where our reference height comes in. You can digitize the reference height. I don't want to digitize the reference height. I know that I set my letters at 25 millimeters, right? So that's where I came in with this. I can digitize it, but then I'm going to have to digitize it for every letter, which is why I set the alphabet at a set size before I started, because I don't want to digitize the reference height for every letter. Remove functions. So if I didn't path this and this had the trims in there, or let's talk about lock stitches. If I don't remove the functions, it's going to leave them in there, and you'll have lock stitches and you'll have trims, and we don't want that, right? Yeah. Now it's coming up with letter name. You can tell I have no letters in there. It is going to be a capital A. Okay. When I save this A, if there's an issue with the letter, I can go back and I can resave over an A. You can see what letters you have saved in your alphabet there. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now it's giving me my digitizing crosshairs that I use, because I use crosshairs. I don't use a mouse. And it's asking me for the start point of the reference line. For those of you that don't know where it's asking me that, it's in the very bottom left-hand corner next to the little exclamation point next to the temperature. So right there, it says enter the start point of the reference line. And what it's talking about is the baseline. Okay. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to pick my very start point. I'm going to line it up on the baseline that I have digitized. And I'm going to click my start point. And then I'm going to hold my shift key, because shift is going to lock it to the axis. So now I don't have to worry if I'm a little bit off, up, and down. I'm going to bring it over here. And I'm going to click my second point, and it says letter A has been saved to the alphabet needle bar live. So now I've saved that letter. I can select B, object, create letter, alphabet name, needle bar live, letter name, capital B. My reference height is the same, 25 millimeters, remove functions. I'll go ahead and hit OK. And I'm going to come in here. And this is where I have to come, like if I'm really drilling in here, I have to come back out a little bit so I can see where that letter ends. And this is where those vertical guidelines are.
Picking the most furthest point on the left side, depending on how the letter's shaped, and the most furthest point on the right side. So you're going to want your extreme ends of where, you might have weird letters where you have something that's really sticking out far to the right, like the top of a T of a script font or something like that.
Yep.
It's the very, very extreme ends of the letter that you're using.
Now, this is for block lettering.
Mm-hmm.
We actually change this a little bit when we go into script lettering. We set it up slightly different. And then we change the way our baseline lays out because it's a script font and we do want that overlap.
Right.
So if you guys want to see another video, Needlebar Live, in a future topic where we go over doing this with a script font, we can go over that too. I don't think, I'm looking at the time, we're at 47 minutes in, so I don't think that we're going to have time to be able to do them both, but I'm going to come here and I'm going to, I've zoomed in more. I'm going to reset my guidelines a little bit better so that they're set up where I need them. And this actually descends, which most letter C's do descend. Let's go ahead and bring that. You can see that the art also descends a little bit below. And these are things that you'll need to know when you're creating your letter. We'll go ahead and we'll go in here and we'll create our letter. We'll go to our alphabet name, Needlebar Live, and we'll do our capital C and we'll hit OK. And then I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to set my point on this side. And then I scroll out and I'm going to drop my second point right there. And now I've got my letter C. So saving them out is more tedious, I guess, than actually, well, I guess digitizing them is pretty tedious too. When you're doing a whole alphabet with your capital letters, your lowercase letters, your special characters, your numbers, your symbols, other things. So that's pretty much just saving out those letters. If we go in here and we type in ABC and create our text and we drop it right there, we now have our text. You can see that it is closest join. We're kerned at 10% of our letter height.
And you can see that there, within his settings, he has underlay applied to it. So it's doing the underlay that he has applied to it. He's got some pull comp to it. So it's adding pull comp. So
you can see that it's got the pull comp. And then you can also see here that the spacing is 10% of the letter height.
Right.
Which is right there. So, if you need to change it later and you need to go 5%, nudge them a little bit more, you can. These are settings that you'll have available to you as a user of a font because everybody has this.
Right.
And then we could go into customizing this more in maybe a different live and talk about saving out user refined letters.
Real quick before we end, I just wanted to touch on where we had kind of those idiosyncrasies in the true type fonts. This is just one that I pulled up when Jeff was working here. As you can see, this is whatever this font is called. It's Fructure. If you come in here and normally digitizing, coming around curves and stuff, if I were to break this apart, it did make some choices here where it kind of has some weird change of directions as far as these satin pieces instead of coming up and capping this part of the B. So it's a nice, more fluid look to it. It did come through and kind of pick some weird elements to put these letters together. So this is just something where it's duplicating the shape of the font, like this E shape is there, but if you break it apart, it's kind of just these chunks of weird pieces that make up the letter. So that's something you have to keep in mind when you're using a true type font with it. That's basically imported and auto digitized within the software. So
yeah. So real quick, we'll go over some things that we could possibly cover in the future if you guys are interested. One of them is user refined letters. That's where you can actually make changes to the objects and save those changes. based off of criteria. So if you go to make your, let's say you make the letters below 5 millimeters and you drop your A crossbar, you can save that as a refinement so that if anytime you move it below 5 millimeters, it'll auto do that. The other thing that we didn't cover is the script fonts, how to save those out, because you do save those out a little bit differently. The last thing I'm going to throw out here is a disclaimer. In my experience, we'll start with that. In my experience, the ESA fonts that are generated by Wilcom, they are version locked. So this ABC that I just created, I could send this ESA font to Justin and he would not be able to access it because he is on a version back from what I am. If Justin creates an ESA font in his software, I will be able to open it because I'm on a version forward.
Right.
So if you do want to make a lot of ESA fonts and you do want to kind of share them, then you're going to need to make sure that you save them back in the oldest possible format that you can. For me, that's E4.0 because I have the E4.5.8 as well as the digital edition, and the E4.5.8 E4.0 is a side install to that, so it installs next to it, and then it uses the same dongle, but I can't go any further back. That's just something to be aware of, because I did not know that when I bought the Font Creator Element, and it was fun figuring it out. And it's just something to be aware of. You know, if you're going to invest into this, I don't know what it runs right now. It's anywhere from $600 to $1,200 for the Font Creator Element in Wilcom. If you're going to invest into it, I think it's important that you know what you're getting.
Right.
If I did left chest logos for a major corporation, and I had to do everybody's name, right? It's worth it for me to digitize the entire font and set it up this way.
Exactly.
Just things to consider. I don't know. Justin, did you have any questions for me?
One question I have, so the fact that you have the Stitch Creator and you can go in and individually edit individual letters within the font. Can you
the user refined lettering?
Yes. Can you
have access to that?
Can you take a Wilcom font and make those same adjustments?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I don't believe that you need the font element to do that, to save a user refinement to a letter.
Oh, that's cool.
So if you are editing, if you're using Block 2, we'll just throw one out there. If you're using Block 2 a lot and you want to save a letter, you're shrinking it down to 5 millimeters, you're making some changes and you want to save that so that happens every time you shrink it down to that, you should have access to be able to do that.
What Jeff is referring to is like the example that he used, the crossbar of an A. When you get into the smaller letters, as you're digitizing, you actually want to move that horizontal bar further down to open up that void in the A, so it doesn't close up. Yeah. So there's something that within a certain letter that once you cross that threshold, like if you get down to 5 millimeters and you want to drop that bar down, or say a letter like a T that has the endpoints to the left and right. I notice that sometimes on the smaller lettering, the space, since you have the push out of those sides, it pushes into the next letter a lot of times. So I may want to shorten that crossbar or create more space after the T or whatever, however you want to adjust it. It's individually adjusting those letters. So when you are using a keyboard font and you are crossing that threshold, like making it 5 millimeters tall, it's going to make that change for you every time.
So really fast, I just dropped this to 5 millimeters tall and I move that crossbar down. I can go up here and I can go create user refined letter. And now I can put in my refinements and the names to give it. So
nice.
That will make that change on these letters anytime I do go down to the specified size. That's something that we can cover in another live, though. It's pretty quick, but we can also cover the types of changes that you would want to make to letters when you get down to that, and when you would want to have those kick in.
I think fonts, text, however you want to refer to it. That's always a big thing in embroidery. It's something that needs to come out clean, especially small lettering on hats. All these different factors. It could be a headache sometimes. So we can definitely dive more into tips and tricks on text and fonts and whatnot. So yeah, for sure. If you're in a Discord, drop the suggestions on specifics that you'd like to see on fonts and lettering, or if you're in the Facebook group, you could make some comments there, post, hit us up on everywhere you can find us as well.
Yep. Just if you do want to see future lives, you can always post it in the group. Chances are we may or may not miss it. It's always best if you can jump into the Discord and you can join the Discord group. There is a suggest a live channel in there where you can go in and you can suggest something that you would like us to cover. Also, if you guys missed it last week, no, 2 weeks ago, we went over the new embroiderynerd.io with the new thread color matching inventory system. So I'd highly recommend that you guys check that out. It is embroiderynerd.io is the web address. You can create a free account and check that out. It's something really cool that Matt's developed, and I use it a lot. So
I use it pretty much daily. And not only is what he has out and built now, very, very useful. There's a lot of plans on to add a lot more to it. So definitely sign up for a free account. Check it out. There's some paid features to it. But like I said, definitely sign up for a free account, and it's pretty useful.
Awesome. Well, with that, I'm Jeff Fuller from Fuller Embroidery Works. That is Justin Armenta from JA Digitizing Studios. Thank you guys for hanging out with us, and we'll catch you next time.
Good night, everybody.